A woman woke up after being dead for 27 minutes. Then she scrawled a spine-chilling message. But before we start, please give the video a like and make sure to subscribe to WonderBot and hit the bell so you'll never miss any uploads from us. After 27 minutes of unconsciousness, Tina Hines is finally coming round in hospital. Her husband Brian is convinced that the heart attack she just suffered almost killed her. And as Tina hands over a spooky note, it appears that she may well have entered the afterlife. Prior to having a cardiac arrest, Tina had been an active mother of 4 who ate well in a bid to stay healthy. As a result, her family could never have imagined that her heart would one day simply stop. But while this was shocking in itself, it was what happened next that caused the biggest surprise. Following her heart attack, Brian worked with rescue crews to keep his wife alive. It wasn't an easy task, and firefighters were forced to shock Tina's heart back into action a total of 5 times. But little did they know that as they worked, unconscious Tina was having a surreal near-death experience. Tina and her husband Brian were college sweethearts. They met at Biola University, a Christian school in California. They'd shared a couple of classes together. Of course, the pair couldn't have known back then that years later, Brian would one day be tasked with saving Tina's life. Recalling those early days at college in a June 2019 interview for Phoenix's American Heart Association, Brian said of Tina, "She was tall, she was athletic, she'd be jogging by, or she could be going someplace and I'd say, 'Hey, what are you doing?' And she'd say, 'I'm going running.' So I'd say hi to her." From there, Brian and Tina's relationship progressed quickly and with ease. "A friendship started, and then we got engaged," Brian explained. "Then 6 months later, we got married." Revealing his love for Tina, he added, "She made things that I like to do, and she made them better by being there." Given that Brian was Tina's husband, it's perhaps unsurprising that he had good things to say about the mother of his children. But he wasn't the only one to sing her praises. Family friend Jeff Logus told Phoenix's American Heart Association, "Tina is adored by everybody. Brian and Tina, their family, they spread so much joy and happiness in everybody's life." Tina and Brian would go on to have a family of 4 children and eventually settled into Phoenix, Arizona. It was at their home in the city that the couple's world was almost shattered when Tina suffered a heart attack. However, the story took a miraculous turn as Tina somehow woke up after being dead for 27 minutes. The strange events unfolded on February 12, 2018. It was just like any normal Monday, Brian told Phoenix's American Heart Association. The couple had been out for a hike before their good friend Jeff called in to see them. However, shortly after he arrived at their home, disaster struck. "When I got here, Tina and I were standing shoulder to shoulder 1 second, Jeff recalled. The next second, Tina had fallen virtually straight face forward into the rocks. Realizing something was wrong, he yelled out to Brian to call 911. Given that Tina had appeared in good health mere moments earlier, Brian was at first confused by Jeff's demand. However, when he saw his wife on the ground, he knew that her condition had taken a serious nosedive. So with Tina's life seemingly hanging in the balance, Brian called emergency services. From what he could see, Brian believed that Tina was having a heart attack. Even more worryingly, she'd passed out and wasn't breathing. As a result, Brian was instructed to lie Tina flat on her back so that he or Jeff could carry out CPR. Together, they battled to keep Tina alive until emergency services arrived to take over. The emergency call handler told Brian that Tina needed chest compressions. Describing what happened next, he told Phoenix's American Heart Association, "Jeff immediately, because I'm talking to the 911 operator, he started pushing down on Tina's chest. Neither one of us had any kind of training at all." Given the physical exertion that CPR can require, however, Jeff soon tired. As a result, it fell to a distraught Brian to save Tina's life. "She was Superwoman," Brian stated. "Here was the girl that I'd known for 30+ years that's worked out every day to not have this happen, and here she is dying, and I was just pushing as hard as I could." During the ordeal, Brian had truly believed that Tina was losing her life. And speaking to Good Morning Arizona in May 2018, months after his wife's heart attack, it appeared he was still haunted by what he'd seen that day. "Her eyelids didn't close," Brian explained. "Her eyelids were open and her eyes were rolled back into the top of her head." Once the fire service personnel arrived at the scene, they took over from Brian. Now all the concerned husband could do was watch, undoubtedly in horror, as firefighter tried to save Tina's life. In the end, the crew gave Tina 5 electric shocks on the way to the hospital in a desperate bid to kickstart her heart. However, according to firefighter Joe Sandman, it was Brian's actions that had prevented Tina from dying on the sidewalk outside her home. Sandman told Phoenix's American Heart Association, "What Tina's husband did prior to our arrival, continuous chest compressions before we got there, is what saved his wife's life." But while Tina would survive her ordeal, things seemed touch and go for a while. By the time she was loaded onto an ambulance, she still hadn't responded. As a result, Brian had to come to terms with the fact that his beloved wife might not survive. And in that desperate moment, Brian turned to God. Recalling his prayers, Brian stated that he tried to make a deal with the big man above. "I told God that if he gave me Tina back, then he could take anything else," Brian said. "He could take all our cars, he could take all my stuff. I don't need that stuff. I needed Tina." And it seems that Brian's prayers may have paid off, because after arrival at the hospital, a doctor told him that his wife was alive. For Brian, Tina's survival was nothing short of a miracle. He truly believed that God had granted him his wish, and what transpired later would appear to confirm his suspicions. That's because while Tina laid lifeless for 27 minutes, she believes that she had a so-called afterlife experience. And Tina isn't the first person to report they'd have a spiritual out-of-body experience when on the cusp of death. Indeed, some individuals who've been brought back to life have reported seeing bright lights or frightening beings. Given that no one knows what happens to us when we leave this world, afterlife experiences are the subject of much fascination. In fact, there's even a near-death experience research foundation. The organization gathers testimonies from people around the globe who've been brought back from the brink in a bid to understand more about what might happen to us when we die. With that in mind, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation's website is filled with amazing stories that may offer an insight into what death has in store. Some accounts are pretty unsettling, however. Nonetheless, many people who've had visions during a near-death experience have reported feelings of serenity and warmth while they basked in a brilliant light. A man going by the name of Richard L. stated that he'd felt calm when coming close to death following a seizure. In his testimony to Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, he said, "I felt no pain. I felt an unending love and a sense of peace as I kept floating towards the light." Similarly, heart attack survivor Heidi C. described seeing the most beautiful white golden light. She added, "There are no words to really express or articulate how I felt or to describe the beautiful light and warmth that I was bathed in. The colors and feelings were a million times magnified." As Tina revived time and time again by emergency services, little did her distraught husband Brian know that she too was having one of these afterlife experiences. The first he would learn of the matter was when Tina came around and was seemingly in a hurry to tell her surrounding family members something. Unable to speak due to a tube in her mouth, Tina was handed a pen and paper to help her communicate. In an almost unintelligible scrawl, she simply wrote, "It's real." Confused, Brian asked his wife what was real. That's when she pointed upwards towards heaven, with tears filling her eyes. Tina later divulged more details of her afterlife experience in an interview with Good Morning Arizona in 2018. She claimed that she'd seen Jesus standing in front of some black gates that led to a beaming yellow light. Tina added, "It was so real, the colors were so vibrant." And for Tina, for her, there's little doubt that what she saw that day was a little piece of heaven. Referring to the number of times she was resuscitated following her heart attack, she said, "From what the paramedics shared with us is that truly I died 5 times and came back." Like many other accounts of afterlife experiences, Tina's included a distinct vision of light. It was bright yellow, so it was almost like that envision of a sun, she told Good Morning Arizona. And it was within those golden rays that Tina claims she saw Jesus just standing there. Given Tina's vision, both she and Brian are convinced that it was God's will to save her life. As a result, the couple have discovered a new appreciation for life. "I'm just so thankful that he didn't take you right then, right now," Brian told Tina, "that you got to stay and still be my wife. So I celebrate every day." Moreover, that isn't the only way in which Tina and Brian's lives are changed in the wake of her heart attack. That's because both of them are now spokespeople for the American Heart Association. And if that wasn't enough, the couple have also found viral fame on account of Tina's apparent afterlife experience. Tina and Brian's story hit social media after their niece Maddie Johnson had a copy of Tina's "It's Real" scribble tattooed on her wrist. She subsequently posted a picture of the spiritual inking on Instagram in June 2019. And alongside the snap, Maddie revealed the meaning behind the tat. In the accompanying caption on Instagram, Maddie wrote, "Tina's story is too real not to share and has given me a stronger confidence in a faith that so often goes unseen. It's given me a tangibleness to an eternal hope that's not too far away. I love you at Tina Hines. The way you boldly love Jesus and others has changed the way I hope to live and love." And Maddie wasn't the only person eager to spread the word about what Tina had apparently seen as she drifted in and out of consciousness. In fact, Tina herself has opened up about her afterlife experience, even telling her story at Arizona's Reunion Community Church. And it was there that Tina revealed she was thankful for what had happened. While addressing the church congregation, Tina explained, "I got to be able to talk about seeing the face of Jesus. I see it as such a beautiful, incredible gift. Where Brian sees it as just an unbelievable, incredible gift that I'm still here, I see it as a gift in a different way, in that I got to literally see Jesus face to face." Meanwhile, Brian spoke about his perspective of the incident in his interview with Phoenix's American Heart Association. "I know that God, the God that I believe, touched her heart and allowed her to come back," Brian said. "He'd heard my plea and had done a miracle in not only letting me have her back, but letting me have her back whole." However, despite their bolstered faith in God, Tina and Brian acknowledged that he wasn't the only person who'd helped to save Tina's life. As a result, the couple made sure they visited the 911 call handler and the firefighters who'd assisted them on that fateful day. It was important for the couple to thank each one in person. And at least one member of the emergency crew who helped Tina after her heart attack also believed that higher forces had intervened to ensure her survival. "It's one of those calls that none of us will ever forget," one of the firefighters told Good Morning Arizona. "I was a witness to a miracle," is the way I look at it. And for Tina, there was one more savior to whom she had to pay tribute for saving her life: her husband of 30 years. After all, it was Brian who'd administered the CPR that kept Tina's heart moving. 36 years after a teenage girl vanished, her family received a cryptic note about a Vatican tomb. For the first time in nearly 40 years, the family of missing teenager Emanuela Orlandi seemed to have a promising lead. The mysterious case has baffled police since 1983. But now an ominous tip-off may finally be pointing them in the right direction. And Emanuela's relatives hold their breath as the Vatican workers prise open two ancient tombs. Perhaps no one could have predicted, though, what the group are about to find. On June 22, 1983, after leaving a music class in the Italian city of Rome, Emanuela vanished without a trace. Since then, alleged sightings and ominous conspiracy theories have only fueled the mystery that surrounds the 15-year-old's disappearance. But despite intense media coverage and tireless efforts from Emanuela's family, no leads have ever provided a breakthrough. Until now, it appears. In the summer of 2018, you see, the Orlando family received an anonymous message that seemed to hint at Emanuela's whereabouts. The cryptic clue, which reportedly instructed the recipients to "look where the angel is pointing," sounded like something from a Dan Brown novel. And ultimately, the tip-off would lead investigators to the heart of a Vatican City cemetery. But would it hold the key to the mystery? Going back to the beginning of the story, Emanuela entered the world in 1968 to parents Maria and Orcole Orlandi. Along with only a handful of other Italian citizens, the girl and her 4 siblings had the privilege of growing up within the walls of Vatican City. According to some reports, you see, Emanuela's father was an employee in the Pope's household, although other sources suggest that he worked for the state bank. In any case, the Orlandi family enjoyed the benefits that life inside Vatican City afforded them. Emanuela's brother, Pietro, would later reveal how he and his siblings had once played in the holy site's magnificent gardens, for instance. And apparently, as the children frolicked, Pope John Paul II himself would sometimes stop and chat to them. Of the family's former surroundings, Pietro told CNN in July 2019, "We thought we were in the safest place in the world. Of course, given what we know now, this statement is tragically ironic." Nonetheless, Pietro added that before Emanuela's disappearance, he felt that Vatican City was a small, friendly community where everyone was very close. And the devastating events that unfolded in the summer of 1983 would ultimately shatter Pietro's illusion of safety forever. Yet June 22, 1983 began as a day much like any other for the Orlandis. As she presumably had done many times before, Emanuela ventured beyond the Vatican City walls to attend a flute class. The teen then finished the lesson and set off to return home, but she was never seen again. At the time of Emanuela's disappearance, school was out for summer. Even so, the teenager had continued going to her flute lessons at the Tommaso Ludovici de Victoria School a few times a week. And to get there, Emanuela would hop on a bus into central Rome before walking around 700 feet to her class. So by June 22, 1983, Emanuela had already made the trip to and from her music instruction several times. But on that day that the teen disappeared, she'd been running late. Apparently, she asked her brother Pietro to accompany her, but he refused. And tragically, it was a decision that would end up haunting him for decades. In July 2019, Pietro revealed to the BBC, "Last time Emanuela and I met was actually not a very nice memory. We had a fight because she had a music lesson. It was really hot, and I refused to go with her because I had something else going on. So she slammed the door and left. And that's the memory I have. I've often thought, what if I'd actually gone with her?" Now, the last confirmed sighting of Emanuela was at a bus stop in central Rome. After this, the teenager seemingly vanished off the face of the earth. But of course, the mysterious disappearance has loomed large on the Italian consciousness ever since. And as a result, the strange case has given rise to conspiracy theories that have implicated secret criminal organizations, and even, unusually, the Vatican itself. But along with these various hypotheses, there have also been alleged sightings connected to the case. For example, one individual claimed to have seen a girl matching Emanuela's description entering a green BMW on the evening that she went missing. Supposedly, the vehicle in question had been close to the music institution that the 15-year-old had attended. Sadly, though, this lead proved to be fruitless. Then, in the days following Emanuela's disappearance, further sightings were apparently made of the girl. One such report, for instance, came in the form of a phone call from a 16-year-old going by the name of Pierluigi, and the youngster claimed to have met the missing girl in Rome's famous Piazza Navona 3 days after she'd gone missing. Interestingly, Pierluigi noticed that the individual whom he'd allegedly seen had been carrying a flute and wearing glasses, which she apparently disliked. He claimed, however, that this person had introduced herself to him and his fiancée as Barbarella. In addition, Pierluigi reported that the girl had been selling cosmetics and had said she'd left home. Strangely, a man who called himself Mario claimed to have had a similar encounter. He reportedly told the Orlandi family that a girl named Barbara had visited his bar 6 days after Emanuela's disappearance. And on that occasion, she had allegedly told him that she was a runaway, although she intended to return to see her sister get married. Mario also said that his venue was located between the missing teen's music class and her home in Vatican City. Meanwhile, one of the earliest conspiracy theories came about just days after Emanuela had disappeared. According to her parents, an unidentified individual contacted them and promised to return their daughter. The only catch? Mehmet Ali Agca, who was incarcerated at the time for a 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II, had to be released. But once again, this apparent clue ended up amounting to nothing. The plot thickened, however, when Agca later told Italian broadcaster RAI that Emanuela was still alive. Bizarrely, the assassin alleged that the missing teen was safe and living in a convent, although he denied knowing her exact whereabouts. But ultimately, investigators found no evidence to support his claims, and the mystery was about to become darker still. In 2005, you see, an even more unsettling theory about what had happened to Emanuela gained traction. Apparently, an unknown individual made a tip-off to an Italian detective, claiming that the missing teen had been abducted at the request of Cardinal Ugo Poletti. Poletti had been the vicar general of Rome at the time of Emanuela's disappearance. And the anonymous informant gave the police an ominous clue. They said the secret to the mystery lies in a tomb in San Apollinare Basilica, and specifically in the grave of Enrico Renatino de Pettis. The prominent gangster had been shot dead in 1990, and his body had been interned in the basilica, which is close to Emanuela's music lesson location, before 1997. The de Pettis theory seemed to look even more likely when a new development emerged in 2008. This time, the mobster's mistress sensationally claimed that he had actively participated in the girl's abduction. She alleged, too, that the missing girl's remains had been buried beneath a house in the periphery of Rome. But despite detectives following the lead provided by de Pettis' mistress, they once again found nothing. In fact, they discovered that the concrete foundations of the building in question had actually been set prior to the teen vanishing. And unfortunately, a 2012 search of de Pettis' crypt yielded no further clues either. Another disturbing twist in the case came that same year when attention turned to the Vatican itself. You see, top Catholic exorcist Gabrielle Amorth alleged that a Roman teen who vanished in 1983 had been abducted into a sex party network and subsequently killed. Even more disturbingly, Amorth suggested that foreign diplomats and Vatican authorities had been involved. Consequently, then, he told Italy's La Stampa newspaper that the investigation should be carried out inside the Vatican and not outside. But once again, these allegations came to no avail, and as a result, Emanuela's family were left without answers for nearly 4 decades, until the case took another shocking turn in 2019. Today, Emanuela's mother, Maria, is still a resident of the Holy City, but Pietro has come to view the Vatican with suspicion. After having led a 36-year campaign to find Emanuela, he's accused Vatican officials of not being transparent during the investigation. In fact, Pietro told CNN in July 2019, "The Vatican has never collaborated with the investigators or with us family members. They've always denied the possibility that there may be responsibilities within the Vatican, and have always said that they gave everything they had and hid nothing." And while CNN put these comments to the Vatican at the time, no response was given. Apparently, Pietro had become convinced that the Vatican knows something about Emanuela's disappearance after he met Pope Francis in 2013. He explained to CNN that Francis had told him, "Emanuela is in heaven." Pietro added, "It froze my blood to hear a pope say Emanuela is dead." That said, the encounter also gave him hope of someday finding an answer. And since meeting Pope Francis, Pietro claims that he has attempted to contact the holy leader again on numerous occasions to obtain more information, but to no avail. Emanuela's brother isn't alone in his theory either. Indeed, Italian crime journalist Fiorenza Sarzani told CNN, "Every type of clue has always led to the Vatican." She also added that officials have never accounted for why a mobster such as de Pettis would be buried in an important church. Then, in the summer of 2018, the Vatican was implicated yet again. The Orlandi family received a tip-off that came in the form of an image of a religious statue with an accompanying message. This clue bafflingly instructed the family to look where the angel is pointing. And ultimately, the cryptic note led the search for Emanuela in 2 tombs inside a small cemetery within Vatican City. More specifically, the site in question is known as the Teutonic Cemetery. Situated close to St. Peter's Basilica, it's the final resting place for German-speaking members of the Roman Catholic Church. But despite its prominent location, the graveyard is tucked away behind a set of imposing walls, and its ornate gates are reportedly watched by a Swiss guard. In order to access the tombs outlined in the tip-off then, the Orlandi family needed the Vatican's permission, and given the fact that they were reportedly received no answer to their previous request for information, they weren't hopeful, especially since Pietro's attempts to speak with Pope Francis had allegedly been ignored. But after close to a year of campaigning by Emanuela's family, the Vatican finally agreed to exhume the tombs. In the wake of the development, a buoyed Pietro told the BBC, "For the first time, the Vatican shows that they're considering the possibility that there may have been internal responsibilities within the Vatican for Emanuela's disappearance." That said, a Vatican spokesperson stressed that police were only trying to determine whether or not Emanuela could have been buried in the cemetery. Vatican officials would not be looking into the teen's disappearance either, as it had occurred outside their jurisdiction. It appeared likely then that the investigation would remain the responsibilities of authorities in Rome. Nevertheless, the search got underway in July 2019, and any remains discovered during the hunt would undergo DNA testing, which would apparently take weeks to yield results. But while Pietro was hopeful that the exhumation marked a turning point with the Vatican, Sarzanini had other reservations. In July 2019, the journalist alleged that the cooperation of Vatican officials merely served to direct any suspicion away from them. She told CNN, "I fear that the Vatican has decided to open the tombs because they know there's nothing inside, and this will definitely put an end to the claims of the Orlandi family." In any case, the Orlandis were permitted to oversee the exhumation of the tombs, along with the relatives of the believed occupants. But ahead of the search, Pietro was forced to consider what would happen if Emanuela's remains were indeed found. After all, he'd never lost hope of finding his sister alive. Contemplating the possibility that the exhumation would solve at least one part of the mystery, Pietro told the BBC, "It would be anguishing for my mother. She still lives inside the Vatican, less than 1,000 feet from that cemetery. To even think that she's been so close to my sister for so long without knowing it, it makes me feel horrible." Pietro added, "In fact, I actually hope Emanuela's not there." And it turns out she wasn't. In fact, the Teutonic Cemetery tombs were found to be entirely empty. That's right. In a bizarre twist, the crypts didn't even contain the remains of the two princesses who were believed to have been buried there. Yes, unbelievably, the remains of two German nobles were nowhere to be found. Both had roots in the Danish royal family and had died in 1836 and 1840, respectively. But search teams did uncover two ossuaries, which are small chambers used to bury the dead. And interestingly, these were discovered beneath a trap door in a building next to the Teutonic Cemetery. But the story didn't end there, as the ossuaries did indeed contain human remains. Yet while scientists can date bones in a matter of hours, DNA identification is a lengthier process. Still, Alessandro Gassotti, a Vatican spokesman, assured Vatican News that forensic tests were being carried out according to international protocols, although he declined to speculate on how long this would take. And while it's not known for sure why the tombs of the two princesses were found empty, at least one explanation has been put forward. In particular, the Vatican has speculated that the crypt's remains may have been relocated during site work in the 1960s and 1970s. But while the mystery of the bones is certainly intriguing, Emanuela's family are still in limbo. After all, they appear no closer to finding out what happened to their loved one. Yet Pietro refuses to give up hope that Emanuela may one day be found alive. He told the BBC, "She and I had a very close relationship. We both liked music. She was trying to teach me a Chopin piece. We only got through 2 pages, and then she went missing. I hope one day she comes back to teach me the rest." 54 years after a mom vanished without a trace, workers made an astonishing discovery in her yard. It's a cold morning in Pennsylvania, and contractors are hard at work outside a Pittsburgh home. But when they look beneath the deck of the century-old property, they discover something sinister buried in the dirt. For decades, a strange mystery has haunted the neighborhood, and now the grim truth has finally been revealed. Built at the beginning of the 20th century, the 2-story red brick house sits on Black Street in the northeast of the city. And in 2018, it was the subject of a substantial renovation project. But when the owners instructed workmen to tackle the rear of the property, something that would forever taint their dream home was uncovered. There, hidden beneath the deck in the backyard, contractors discovered a set of human bones. But who could have met with such a strange and grisly fate? As investigators rushed to identify the remains, they stumbled across a secret that's been kept hidden for more than 50 years. For retired cop Therese Rocco, it was a chance to finally lay old demons to rest. In 1964, her friend and neighbor Mary Arcuri had vanished while leaving a husband and children behind. According to some, she'd simply fled a broken marriage. But other rumors suggested a far more sinister explanation. And half a century later, human remains were discovered in the backyard of the Arcuri's former house. But would they finally lead to the truth about what really happened to Mary? As Rocco joined forces with the Pittsburgh police to get to the bottom of the mystery, a bizarre story began to emerge. Historically, of course, it would be far from the only time that a missing person mystery has been solved uncomfortably close to home. For example, in December 2017, Marcia Eubank revealed the truth about what had really happened to her husband Howard. He'd been missing for 6 months by that point, but his wife knew more than she was letting on. Back in 1994, Marcia had married Howard, who was already the father of 2 adult sons. And for more than 20 years, they lived together as man and wife. By mid-2017, they were residing in Coventry Township, a small community in northeast Ohio. But Martha shocked their neighbors by suddenly informing them that Howard had left. According to reports, Marcia and Howard's marriage was troubled, although there was little to suggest that they'd call it quits. Nevertheless, she insisted that her husband had moved more than 1,000 miles away to Houston, Texas. Marcia claimed that he'd begun a new life there, working as a driver. Understandably, Howard's family were upset and confused by these developments, but as time passed, messages from the missing man began to trickle in. "I'll reach out to people when I'm ready to," one Facebook post read. "Please don't try to contact me." In another, he claimed to be pining for his wife. As the months went by, however, Howard's family still struggled to understand his decision. Then, in December 2017, his son Howard Jr. made a gruesome discovery. Having forgotten the keys to the house that his father and Marcia once shared, he decided to let himself in through an open window. But in his stepmother's office, he found a rubber bag crawling with flies and maggots. Disgusted, Howard Jr. dragged the bag outside and messaged Marcia to ask for an explanation. She then made a startling confession. Over the phone, she informed him that the object contained part of Howard's body and that the rest of the corpse could be found in the basement. What's more, Marcia stated that she'd murdered her husband herself. After police arrived, they were quickly able to confirm Marcia's story. For 6 months, she'd been posing as her husband online, while the real Howard's body lay decomposing in the basement of their family house. And in February 2019, she was handed a sentence of life behind bars. Before that, there'd been the case of LaTanisha Carmichael, a 3-year-old girl who disappeared back in November 1979. At the time, she'd been living with her mother, Madeline, and 3 siblings in an apartment in Brooklyn, New York. But one day, LaTanisha mysteriously vanished. By way of explanation, the family simply said that the girl had moved away. On other occasions, however, they claimed that she'd gone into care. 5 years later, an aunt questioned LaTanisha's twin brother, Andre, about his sister. By that point, however, the boy couldn't even remember LaTanisha. And when he then spoke to his mother about the matter, he claims that she responded with violence. For years afterward, the girl's whereabouts remained a mystery. Then, in 1999, Andre finally worked up the courage to talk to his older sister, Sabrina, about LaTanisha. And shockingly, she informed him that the girl had been murdered. With her brother's encouragement, Sabrina eventually contacted the authorities and told them the truth about what happened back in 1979. According to Sabrina, she'd witnessed her mom, Madeline, and Gregory, the oldest Carmichael child, beating LaTanisha to death. Afterwards, she claimed they'd stuffed the girl's body into a suitcase and hid it in their apartment. For years, Sabrina had been too afraid to speak out about her little sister's gruesome fate. Eventually, police arrived in Brooklyn to investigate the Carmichael's apartment, and there they discovered a closet containing a number of air fresheners. Inside, they found a trunk packed with baking soda, which concealed another smaller case. This time, the object had been covered in multiple plastic bags, and handfuls of mothballs had been put in between. Shockingly, this makeshift tomb did indeed contain the remains of LaTanisha. And off the back of the startling discovery, Madeline was arrested on suspicion of murder. In court, the prosecutor called the crime bizarre and unthinkable, and referred to it as a deep, dark family secret, according to the Associated Press. At the time, Madeline's defense attorney claimed that LaTanisha had died in an accident. According to him, the distraught mother had hidden the body in an attempt to conceal the truth. This approach didn't convince the jury, however, and the 61-year-old was found guilty of murder. Gregory, meanwhile, was charged with criminally negligent homicide. So, would Mary Arcuri join the ranks of missing people who ultimately turned up dead in their own home? By February 2018, the house that she once shared with her husband had been extensively remodeled. But when the new owners decided to renovate their backyard, they were in for a shock. On the morning of February 28th, contractors were already at the property and conducting work on the deck that spanned the back of the house. But then, they made a macabre discovery that would stop them in their tracks. There, buried in a Pittsburgh backyard, was a set of unmistakable human remains. At just after 9:30 a.m., workers at the house contacted emergency services, and an investigation soon began. Police initially believed that the discovery was linked to the case of an unnamed missing lady. But when they reached out to Therese for assistance in identifying the remains, there was a bizarre change in direction. By coincidence, Therese had once lived near the house at 5445 Black Street, and as a result, she had clear memories of the family who once lived there. In fact, Therese even recalled a special bond that she'd shared with Mary. "I was just a young girl, and she came to the door with this tiny little baby, and she put the baby in my arms and said, 'I want you to be the godmother,'" Therese told the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in February 2019. According to the reports, at the beginning of the 1960s, Albert and Mary had purchased the home on Black Street, and for the next few years they'd resided there with their 2 children. Therese recalled, however, that the couple's relationship had been troubled. Then in 1964, life in the Arcuria household had changed for good. That year, Mary disappeared. According to Albert, his wife had left him, taking all of her possessions but leaving the children behind. By then, Therese had become a policewoman and headed up the local missing persons unit. But because Mary had allegedly left of her own accord, it seems that no record of her disappearance was ever made. When Mary first vanished, there were rumors in the neighborhood that Albert had claimed she'd been unfaithful. And as time passed, some people remained puzzled about her disappearance. I knew there were problems, and I thought, leave it alone, Therese recalled. But I also wondered why she didn't try to get in touch with her kids. In addition, some of the Arcuri's relatives, who lived in another unit at 5445 Black Street, had also grown suspicious. My mother, we talked about it, and she knew something happened to her. Charles Saberna, who was just a boy when Mary disappeared, told the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Moreover, he recalled that Albert had constructed a terrace on his property not long after his spouse had allegedly run away. Before long, more gossip had sprung up in the neighborhood. This time there were whispers that Albert had murdered his wife. But without anything more concrete to go on than hearsay, Mary's disappearance was never investigated. And so for 5 decades her whereabouts remained a mystery. Then, though, Therese was contacted about the remains discovered at the Arcuri's home. Soon they were able to prove that the investigators' initial theory was wrong. And when she realized where the body had been found, she began to wonder if it could be connected to Mary's disappearance. And so she put the police in touch with her goddaughter. Using DNA testing, investigators were quickly able to discover the truth. Tragically, Mary was dead, and her body had been buried in the backyard of her family home. Before making news of the discovery public, police reached out to Mary's surviving family members to inform them what had been uncovered. "It's good we found out," Charles said. "We waited all these years." But even though the development finally gave him some closure, he regretted that many of his older relations had died without knowing the truth. Therese wasn't surprised to find out that her neighbor and friend had been dead all along. When you don't know where a person is for a number of years, and you don't hear, and there's no indication that there's a communication of any sort, you generally have to think the worst, she told KDKA in February 2019. So, what happened back in 1964? And how had Mary ended up dead and buried, with Albert insisting that she'd run away? Well, according to Charles, his great-uncle had been a harsh man who hated children. But was that enough to consider him capable of murdering his wife? In contrast to Charles' recollections, however, Therese remembers her neighbor as a mild-mannered man. And even though she accepts that Mary's death was suspicious, she still struggles to believe that Albert could have been behind it. "I never in my own thoughts believed this woman had left," she admitted, "and I could never believe that this man had any involvement in her disappearance." According to investigators, Mary's remains consisted entirely of bones by the time they were discovered. And in this state of decomposition, it's difficult to even determine the cause of death. However, they noted that there were no signs of injury, which in turn meant there wasn't enough evidence to deem the case a homicide. Sadly then, the mystery may remain forever unsolved. 1 year after Mary's disappearance, a tragic story had appeared in the Pittsburgh press. Apparently, Albert's car had veered at high speed into a local car dealership around the corner from his home. According to the report, the accident had been fatal, and Mr. Arcuri passed away at 40 years of age. Therese believed that Albert may have committed suicide by intentionally orchestrating the collision. "That accident was deliberate," she told KDKA. "He rammed his car on Baum Boulevard into a building, and it was determined that he had no reason to do that." Had the guilt-ridden man been involved in his wife's death and then killed himself just a year later? For Therese, such an idea is hard to accept. "Even to this day, it's difficult for me to believe he could have killed her, or anyone for that matter," she explained. "The mere fact that he buried her right under their home and continued to live there with his 2 children is almost unbelievable." But it wasn't long after that he took his own life. Investigators have not yet made any arrests or charges in relation to the death, and according to a press release from a police spokesperson, they've been unable to shed any light on the strange case. Police cannot speculate on how Mary R. Curie died or why she was buried in the backyard, it read. 6 months after the terrible discovery was made, the property at 5445 Black Street went on the market. Just a few weeks later, it sold for a little under $400,000. At the moment, it's unclear whether or not the new owners know the gruesome history of the home. And as time passes, it seems less and less likely that Mary's family will ever get to the bottom of her death. Was the unfortunate woman the victim of a tragic accident, which was then covered up by a broken-hearted husband? Or was there something altogether more sinister at play? Like the other missing people who never really left home, the story of Mary R. Curie serves as a tragic reminder that things aren't always what they seem. A couple were planning their child's funeral. Then she opened her eyes and said these 7 words. After fighting cancer since the age of 4, it seemed that Abby Furco was finally losing her battle. For doctors had given the youngster now 10 just 2 days to live. So her family gathered around her bedside in 2016 to say their goodbyes. But just as it seemed that Abby's time was running out, she opened her eyes. And furthermore, she said something that took her parents' breath away. Now Abby lives in Virginia Beach, Virginia, with her mom Patty, dad Joe, older sister Maggie, and little sister Emily. And at age 10, Abby appeared to be much like any other child her age, for she enjoyed summer camp, reading, and baking for her loved ones. Meanwhile, some of her dislikes include math, her least enjoyable school subject. But frankly, numbers were the least of Abby's concerns. That's because the youngster had been diagnosed with cancer in 2011 at the tender age of 4. Indeed, she had a rare form of the disease known as Philadelphia chromosome positive acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And unlike many forms of cancer, the strain cannot be treated with your typical chemotherapy drugs. With that in mind, Abby's prognosis didn't look good. For, you see, she was given a 20% chance of survival by her doctors, much to her family's anguish. And Mom Patty recalled the moment her life fell apart in a YouTube video for the St. Baldrick's Foundation. In her emotional testimony, Patty struggled to rein in her tears. That's right, she said, "The day Abby was diagnosed will be in my mind forever." Dr. Wessler introduced himself as a hematologist-oncologist, and his first words were, "Your daughter Abigail has leukemia." And after that, I heard nothing else of what he said. What's more, Patty also opened up about Abby's diagnosis in a 2017 interview with People. As the mom went on to explain, "We were devastated. We were basically told that she was going to die. There was very little hope." Meanwhile, Dad Joe told the St. Baldrick's Foundation, "We didn't know what to expect. It's not something that anybody could ever prepare for." On that note, family life was about to change dramatically for the Furcos. For you see, Abby would now spend most of her time in hospital. As she turned from 4 to 5 to 6, her life became a whirlwind of pills, needles, and chemo. Also, Abby had a bone marrow transplant and took part in a drug trial, always with her family at her side. As Patty told People, "We kept her surrounded by love because we knew at any moment we could lose her. There were moments we didn't know if she'd pull through, so she had many infections that could have ended her life. All we had to do was watch her fight and try to get better." Recalling this challenging time in her life, Abby would later tell WAVY TV 10, "There were lots of new and scary things to me, and I was only 4 years old, so I didn't understand most of it. I was still kind of new to even going and just get like your normal kid checkups. It was super scary." But thankfully, Abby got better around October 2013. Yep, she responded well to her first 2 years or so of treatment. Consequently, she was able to return to normal life. So for one special year, Abby attended school, spent time with her friends, and went to soccer practice without treatment. What's more, the youngster signed up for the Girl Scouts, just like other kids her age. However, the return to normalcy was short-lived. Indeed, sadly, Abby's leukemia returned in September 2014. As a result, her family were facing the prospect of losing their little one once more. And having Abby diagnosed with cancer for a second time felt like a particularly cruel blow to the Furcos. Moreover, the youngster would also appear to suffer a lot more on this occasion. As Patty went on to explain to People, "As hard as that first diagnosis was, this one tested every ounce of our being. Revealing how the return of her cancer affected Abby, Patty said, "She became completely immobile. Any movement hurt her and she hardly spoke." To add to that, an operation was on the horizon. In order to treat her leukemia, it was decided that Abby needed a second bone marrow transplant. So she underwent the procedure at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago before transferring to the Duke Children's Hospital in North Carolina. But that's when things took a devastating turn for the worse. Following her transplant, Abby received a number of serious complications. In February 2015, she contracted graft versus host disease. The condition occurs when white blood cells within the donated bone marrow start to attack the transplant patient's normal cells. Terrifyingly, its symptoms include skin rashes, diarrhea, and liver damage. And Abby's worries didn't end there. In May 2016, her kidneys began to fail because of the aggressive treatment she'd undergone to fight her cancer. So she was consequently hospitalized once more. But on this occasion, doctors broke the devastating news that there was nothing more they could do for her. Heartbreak appeared to be just around the corner. So Abby entered intensive care, needing dialysis around the clock. And her doctors warned Patty and Joe that she would only survive for 48 hours if taken off the machine. With that, it seemed that Abby's life was drawing to a close. And so her parents began planning for her death. As Patty explained to people, doctors told us it was time to let her go. She was only awake for like an hour each day. We began preparing our other daughters for her death. And so Patty and Joe made what must have been an agonizing decision to remove Abby from intensive care and bring her home. In the comfort of her own home in Virginia, Abby could live out her final days with friends and family. In fact, her grandparents took a flight so they could say one final farewell to their grandchild. Furthermore, Patty and Joe began thinking ahead to Abby's funeral, choosing songs, flowers, and even a casket. However, Abby was determined to cling to life with every fiber of her being. As Dad Joe told WTKR, "While we had dozens of people in the house, Abby found a moment of quiet one time, individually to both Mom and me, and said a very soft voice, 'I know I'm supposed to die. I don't think I'm going to yet.'" This period was especially difficult for Abby's sisters, Maggie and Emily, who were still too young to understand what was happening. In 2016, Patty told the Virginian pilot, "We just talked to the girls and told them that we would always be together, or at least our souls would be." But it was then that Abby did something that would surprise everyone. She woke up. And not only that, she started to get better. A delighted Patty told people, "We couldn't believe it. In a matter of days, weeks, months, she started walking and getting stronger." But that's not all. By getting better, Abby had defied the odds. As a result, Patty told people that her recovery was an absolute miracle. Speaking to the Virginia pilot, the mom added, "The doctors have no idea what happened. One of them told me that in over 25 years, he'd never seen anything like it." Meanwhile, Abby's dad told WTKR, "Medically speaking, Abby should not be with us anymore." Abby thumbed her nose at the medical profession in this respect and said, "Thank you for your opinion. I'll see you guys in a couple months or a couple years," and has been continuing on. With that in mind, even Abby's doctor, Jacob Wessler, was shocked by the youngster's recovery, for it had been his team that told the Furcos to expect the worst. He explained to people, "She was very, very sick, and her body was shutting down slowly, and her organs weren't working correctly anymore, and every intervention was just making her worse." As Dr. Wessler continued, "We told Patty and Joe there was nothing else we could do. The only foreseeable outcome was that Abby was going to die. We helped her get home for hospice care, but when we started backing off, taking away treatments, so she wasn't on so many meds, she started getting better all on her own." And while Abby's recovery had proven all the medical experts wrong, Dr. Wessler was happy to eat his words on this occasion. He said of his patient, "She's had ups and downs, but if she continues on this path, she's going to make us all look like fools. She's defied every single odd." While Wessler couldn't explain Abby's recovery in scientific terms, he speculated that the youngster's lust for life may have helped. Indeed, her will to keep going was evident in what she told her parents after coming round. In fact, she had even uttered 7 little words to them on her deathbed, which summed up her resilience. And Patty revealed those exact words. The proud mom told people, she told us, I have so much living to do." With that in mind, the family subsequently decided to take life by the horns. Patty said, "We've stopped asking why she's made this discovery and just started looking to her future." Now, shortly after Abby's recovery, she got to attend summer camp, just like other kids her age. And she went to Camp Fantastic in Front Royal, Virginia, which hosts 100 children a year who have been touched by cancer. At the camp, they enjoy a full week of fun, partaking in a range of activities. Recalling her time at Camp Fantastic, Abby told the Virginia pilot, "I had lots of fun classes, and some of the notable activities she took part in included dancing and crafting a stuffed toy carrier with duct tape." So, needless to say, Abby was feeling a lot better after coming so close to a tragic end. But what's more, when the youngster got home from summer camp, she prepared to return to school. Now she was homeschooled initially, but had the help of a tutor from Red Mill Elementary School in Virginia Beach. And despite all the disruption she'd encountered, she'd somehow managed to keep up and could begin 5th grade on time. In the meantime, Abby also had a course of physical therapy in order to regain her strength following the ordeal. As part of this, the youngster had to practice how to walk and climb stairs. Explaining the exercises to the Virginia pilot, Abby said, "I'm trying to get stronger after being in bed so long." For Patty, it was important that her daughter eased her way back into regular life, given everything she'd been through. So for her, it was the little things that mattered, as she went on to explain to the Virginia pilot. "With school starting, we're setting into a routine. We're just taking it one day at a time." However, when Abby was well enough, her family decided it was time to start living life to the full, and they began with a bucket list trip to Italy. Interestingly, the youngster had fallen in love with the country when she did a project about it in 2nd grade. So when the brave girl was at death's door, she was devastated that she'd never get to see Italy in person. All things being better now, Abby's family whisked her off on a whistle-stop tour of Italy. Indeed, she traveled the length and breadth of the country, stopping at a number of cities including Naples, Venice, and Rome. While in Florence, the wannabe chef took 2 cooking lessons, learning how to make Italian classics like tiramisu and pizza. Then, 1 year after Abby's family were told she was dying, the inspirational little girl completed 5th grade. And in an even more positive development, she was also in remission, relying on steroids twice a day. But with that said, Abby's prognosis was not clear, and so her future was still uncertain. Nevertheless, even through her ups and downs, Abby's family were all too aware of how precious every moment with her was. But for the time being, the youngster just wants to focus on living. As Patty told People, she just wants to be a normal kid and hang out with friends and go to school. Her zest for life is just amazing. Given all that she's been through at a tender age, Abby was made an ambassador at the St. Baldrick's Foundation. But her life is about much more than her illness. For starters, in May 2019, she appeared on stage in the school musical Annie Jr., and she dreams of one day opening her own restaurant where she would be the chef. Revealing what gets her through her challenges, Abby told WAVY-TV, "You have to have that perseverance and positive mindset to know that you just have to do it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 second at a time. You've got to take it slowly and hope that you can make it to tomorrow." With this attitude, it seems like the sky's the limit for Abby, now that she's been given her future back. And as her family knows all too well, anything is possible when it comes to this determined little girl. After all, as her mom, Patty, put it to People, "We watched her die and come back to life. Now we're looking to the future." Colorado foster mom takes in baby girl, notices startling similarity to son that defies all odds. Please give the video a like and make sure to subscribe to WonderBot and hit the bell so you'll never miss any uploads from us. When Katie Page moved across the United States to open a new chapter in her life, she could never have known from the onset that her new change of pace would lead her to become a foster mom. The ability to give back and change children's lives was exactly the direction she needed. But in the course of taking care of abandoned infants with special needs, she would uncover a strange mystery. Acting on a hunch, she identified something bizarre that linked 2 of the children under her care, something that would lead her to the greatest coincidence of her life. In her early 30s, Birmingham, Alabama native Katie Page's marriage had come to an end. But within every ending is the potential of a new beginning, and this one no less. The drastic life change offered Katie the possibility of shifting directions and doing something radically new with her life. She was not quite sure yet what that something was, but the choice she was about to make would lead her to the most extraordinary discovery of her life. Katie was going to become a foster mom. But for now, she had absolutely no idea how that decision would lead to an incredible revelation that would land her and her new family in the spotlight. To begin the new chapter of her life, Katie needed a relocation. She moved across the country to Colorado and started a new job in the commercial construction industry. She bought a 4-bedroom fixer-upper home that would require extensive renovations, much of which she'd have to complete herself. To renovate the home would cost a lot of money, but for Katie that was a good thing. So as to avoid unnecessary spending, she would need to do repairs herself, which would compel her to stay occupied and focused as she rearranged her life. Living alone in the large home, even with all the life changes she'd made so far, she felt something significant was still missing. The condition of Katie's new home in Colorado meant she would have to dedicate herself to the project of building it back up to her liking, which included replacing its floors and cabinets. Yet, even if renovating the house kept her busy and motivated, Katie was not feeling a sense of satisfaction. She had a vivid, painful moment of reckoning where she looked in the mirror and sobbed at what she saw, because the reflection staring back at her was not the woman that she had hoped to be. But one day, as she was hard at work, she received an email that would ultimately shift the course of her life. In Katie's inbox was a letter from her local church that she'd recently joined. It was describing an upcoming seminar that would detail a program for fostering children in need. After reading, to her surprise, Katie felt immediately, inexplicably drawn to the idea. She felt she'd found her cause. She phoned her mother and asked if she would accompany her to the meeting. Her mother was initially shocked by the thought that her daughter was even considering the idea of fostering, but despite that, in the end, she agreed to go. They went to the church, unsure of what they had in store. As it turned out, the meeting was exactly what Katie needed to hear. Seeing the presentation gave Katie the chills, and learning more about being a foster mom inspired her. Even though she was nervous and scared at the prospect of becoming a foster mom, the thrill of the possibility filled her heart. She was consumed by thinking about the idea. Even if it appealed to her and spoke to her spirit, she had to carefully weigh her options before rushing into it. After all, she was a single woman in a new environment. Even if she was motivated, would she truly be able to cope with the requirements? Katie came to a conclusion. Being a foster mom was worth pursuing. It was exactly the kind of positive new direction that her life change had allowed for, and she was ready to commit to the enormous amount of responsibility and love that taking care of small children would require. Her mission had presented itself, and it was time to make big moves. On Mother's Day 2015, she finished her application to be a foster mom through the local foster agency and opened the door to a new incredible chapter in her life. It would quickly become far more than she had ever imagined. Shortly after her application was processed, Katie entered her new role as a foster mom with gusto. The cases that came to her were not only children who were without parents, but specifically children who were suffering from traumas that they'd gone through at a very young age. It meant she would have to dedicate extra time and care and be extremely sensitive to the children's needs. The process of helping them and nurturing them helped her realize she wanted much more than fostering. What had begun from a simple email was about to lead to yet another incredible development. After gaining enough experience as a foster mom, Katie wanted to adopt. She wanted to make parenthood a permanent part of her life. Up until that point, she'd taken care of 4 foster kids. Not long after she made her momentous decision, life presented her with the right challenge. She'd been taking care of small children who had gone through many difficult and troubling experiences, leaving her equipped emotionally and with enough skill to handle what the foster system gave her. But the next child's situation would be more extreme and would lead her to uncover an incredible mystery. Even though she was already caring for a 14-month-old, the fostering agency asked Katie if she might be able to take on a special case. A baby boy had been abandoned in the hospital by his mother, and he was only 4 days old. And it wasn't just his extreme young age that made the case urgent. He didn't even have a name that had been registered. To make matters worse, the tiny infant had unfortunately been exposed to drugs in the womb. Thankfully, according to the doctors and nurses that had examined him, the infant did not appear to be suffering from withdrawal. Could Katie help? Despite the fact that she was already taking care of another child, bringing home another would easily stretch her resources and energy thin. But as soon as she heard the baby's story, Katie instantly knew it was the right choice. Before agreeing, she took 5 minutes to call her mother and ask for a huge favor. Could she come live with her for a few months to help her manage the babies? Her mother said yes, and the baby came home with Katie. She gave him the name Grayson, convinced that the grace of God had brought him to her. And soon an aspect of his past that Katie was completely unaware of would come back to her full force. Katie now had a new little man in her life, and he held special meaning for her. For 11 months, Katie and her mother took care of baby Grayson, as care workers tried to find the child's biological parents. They posted in the newspapers and searched through the hospital where he'd been abandoned. All they had was a first name and date of birth of his mother, which had been written on the wristband at the hospital. They hoped they could perhaps find anyone to help him. But the reality that would await them at the end of their search was far more unusual than they had expected. Unfortunately, despite the extensive search, nobody came to claim baby Grayson. It broke Katie's heart. Even though part of her was relieved that now there wouldn't be a debate over who had the right to parent the special boy, she also dreaded the day that she'd have to tell him nobody came for him. Deep inside, this foster mom had undergone a transformation. There was something about this child that set him apart, and she found a unique place in her heart for him. For now, she'd made up her mind. Grayson was her son. She was about to take things one giant leap forward. On the day that Grayson reached 11 months, May 25th, 2017, it was at last time for his foster mom to make his inclusion in the family a formal reality. His adoption became official, and his name was officially recorded as Grayson Page. At first, although Katie wanted to expand her family even further, she felt she needed to wait. She had good reason to take her time. Because of the drug exposure, while he was in the womb, Grayson had developed mental and physical struggles that a healthy child would not ordinarily have. He would need extra attention and care. But just 2 weeks after his adoption, she received a phone call. Scarcely any time had passed since Katie had gone from being Grayson's foster mom to being his adoptive mom. But Katie's caseworker at the fostering agency trusted her enough to feel she could confidently take on yet another case. Once again, it was a 4-day-old baby, and this time it was a baby girl. Sadly enough, this baby girl had come to the fostering agency's attention under the exact same circumstances as Grayson. She'd been abandoned at the same hospital, was exposed to drugs in the womb, and was the same age as him at the time she was found. Katie decided to take action and went against everything she'd previously told herself. It was a challenging situation to be put in. She'd only just taken on a huge and beautiful responsibility for a lifetime. Yet, despite what Katie had told herself about waiting to expand her family, she felt compelled to do something. She knew the right thing to do was to take this baby. And when the care workers brought Katie, the baby girl, to her house to meet her new foster mom, although Katie already knew the details of the circumstances under which the infant had been surrendered, she now noticed an additional peculiar coincidence, one that would lead to the greatest shock of her life. Katie was now a single woman managing 2 infants with special needs, a foster mom to one, an adoptive mom to the other. It was then that she found they had something bizarre in common. It could be pure coincidence, but the birth mother's name listed for the baby girl was the same as the one that had been provided for Grayson. The name stood out to Katie and triggered her suspicion because it was a rather unusual one. Out of curiosity, she told her roommate at the time, Ashley Chappa, to watch the children for a moment as she went and looked for the discharge papers from the hospital that she'd been given when Grayson had arrived into her life. That's when she found another intriguing clue. After rifling through her file cabinets, Katie managed to locate the original records. She already had her suspicions, but now she could verify them. The birth date of the biological mother listed on the baby girl's bracelet was just 1 day shy of the one that had been listed for Grayson's biological mother. It was uncanny. Katie now began to develop a wild theory, however unlikely. The 2 children in her care might have had the same birth mother. Working on a hunch, Katie texted the children's caseworker, but she was told that the idea was ludicrous. Unconvinced, she took on her own initiative that would lead to a development she couldn't have foreseen. The coincidences were far too striking to be ignored, and Katie was now in the depths of research, fascinated by the possibilities. Through rigorous searching, months later, Katie managed to actually track down and sit with the birth mother of the baby girl. It was surreal, but she was determined to get answers. In the course of their conversation, the girl's birth mother confided to Katie information that could possibly support her suspicions. The woman claimed that apart from the infant girl, she'd given to birth another child, one who she'd given up without records. What's more, the woman bore a striking resemblance to Grayson. Katie needed to know for sure. Katie arranged for the children's caseworker to meet up with the baby girl's biological mother and figure out the truth as best she could. Up until that point, Katie had been told there was no way her theory could possibly be true, despite what she saw as a tremendous amount of overlap between the children's details. The information she gathered up until then seemed far too real and too credible to be discredited. She had to have the foster agency back her up. The mystery was far too exciting to leave unresolved. Anxiously, she awaited the news from the caseworker. Then, her phone rang. Katie was at her office in the middle of work. Her phone rang and Katie excitedly picked up, eager. Her caseworker had met with the biological mother of Katie's foster daughter. Baffled and mystified by what she discovered, she exclaimed, "Katie, I think you're right." Stunned by what she'd found, she continued to describe what she had encountered through her conversation with the young girl's birth mother. "Her story breaks my heart, and I can't believe it, but I am 90% sure that you're right, and this is a miracle." An hour later, she called back with yet another message. On the second call from the caseworker to the excited foster mom, she at last gave Katie Page the news she'd been waiting for the whole time. She was able to confirm Katie's hunch 100%. They'd found the same last name provided on both of her foster children's records. Katie had unknowingly welcomed into her home and into her life something absolutely extraordinary. Both the baby girl and Grayson, though they did not look so similar, were actually biological brother and sister. They had both miraculously found their way to the care of the same foster mom. Katie couldn't control herself. After hearing the news, Katie couldn't help but burst into tears of relief and excitement. She couldn't believe what she'd heard, and that her suspicions had been right all along. There was something so special about having taken in two children who were innately linked to one another. Just to be absolutely certain, in case there was any reason that all of the information they'd received up until now would be discredited, she did a DNA test for both of the youngsters, and the proof was in the genes. Katie had known from the beginning what she had to do, and now the opportunity presented itself. What Katie Page had felt all along about Grayson, she also felt about this baby girl for whom she had the privilege of serving as foster mom. On December 28, 2018, Katie officially adopted the baby girl and gave her the name Hannah. The two children bonded with each other quickly. Katie jokingly referred to them as partners in crime, the yin to each other's yang. Man raised by father with Down syndrome has a message for the world. Please give the video a like and make sure to subscribe to WonderBot and hit the bell so you'll never miss any uploads from us. Well, growing up, just about every child is embarrassed by their parents. That changes as they pass through their teenage years and into adulthood, however. It's only when we become older that we realize how special our family truly is. No one would be where they are today, both literally and figuratively, without their mom and dad standing behind them each step of the way. One man in Syria, however, had a truly unique experience growing up. His father had Down syndrome, and that incredible man recently came forward to explain what it was like to grow up in his household, raised by a dad with a genetic disorder. Sadr Isa was born in Syria and grew up in a loving household. When he was older, however, he came to realize that his parents were not the same as everyone else's. Sadr's father, Jad, worked in a mill near the family home. Despite his seemingly ordinary life, with a job, a wife, and a son, there was something different about him. Jad had Down syndrome. The disorder, also known as trisomy 21, is caused by a third copy of a person's 21st chromosome. While symptoms vary between cases, Down syndrome has several common effects. Virtually all people with Down syndrome have some level of mental impairment. Most have stunted physical growth and flat, round faces. But other side effects of the disorder are less obvious. Most people with Down syndrome never have children. While females often have fertility issues, men can biologically reproduce, but usually do not due to their disability. John, however, was an exception to the rule. After John and his wife welcomed Sadr into the world, they wanted to ensure that he had as close to a normal childhood as possible. Their home would be a place of love and safety. As Sadr got older, he came to realize that his father was different. Down syndrome, however, didn't affect his ability to create a loving home. In fact, it did the opposite. "For my father, it was easy," Sadr explained. "A child who grows up in the lap of a person with Down syndrome will have all the love and tenderness that anyone can offer. That environment will only help the child in the long run. This will lead up to a person who has an emotional and social balance and is able to achieve anything, Sauter said. Jod's love wasn't confined to his family, however. While working at the mill, he became a beloved pillar of the local community. No one looked down upon or pitied him. He was simply Jod. Surrounded by his family's love and support, Sauter grew into a man. His parents provided him with a normal life, and eventually he started to think about picking a career. One specific job stood out. Sauter decided that he wanted to become a dentist. As he embarked on the next stage of his life and started his studies, there was always one person cheering him on. As with any other family, his dad was always behind him. During my studies, Jod was my biggest supporter economically, psychologically, and in all respects, and thanks to his support, Sauter recalled. While Jod always loved his son, he's especially happy about Sauter's career path. He'll frequently tell people that his son is a doctor, beaming with pride. But there's another thing that he's proud of. Sauter thinks that his dad is especially proud that he raised a successful son despite having Down syndrome. It's a point of pride and a way to show that he's just like anyone else. It's like he's saying, I have Down syndrome, but I raised my son, did everything to help him become a doctor, Sauter explained. But Jod isn't the only one who's proud. As an adult, Sauter has come to realize how special his father truly is. While it would have been easy for him to feel sorry for himself, Jod never moped. He worked every day to help his family. For me, if I could choose who my father is, I wouldn't think of someone else, Sauter said. I'm proud of him the same way he's proud of me. Jod's selflessness has also helped motivate Sauter to carry on his legacy. He tries to do all he can to be the best person for the sake of his father, who worked hard for him since he was a boy. While Sauter and Jod's relationship might seem different at first glance, there's nothing abnormal about it. The pair love and inspire each other at the end of the day, and that's what family's all about. Two people who learned a lot from Sauter and Jod were Jody and Matt Perry. They married in 2007 after welcoming a baby boy, Finley, into the world. It didn't take long for the UK couple to try for another child. The happy family was prepared this time, taking all the advised precautions you can take during a pregnancy. Jody had miscarried once before giving birth to Finley, and she wasn't going to let another tragedy befall her unborn child. Cautious and prepared, Jody couldn't shake her anxiety during a checkup scan in search of the baby's heartbeat. So when the sonographer told her she could, in fact, hear a heartbeat, Jody squeezed Matt's hand and cried with relief. Then she received a shocking bit of news. There was not one, but two babies in there. Matt and Jody both felt tears of joy fall down their faces. They would be welcoming twin girls into the world, the perfect additions to their family of three. That's when things took a downward turn. Jody delivered both children without complications, though the twins arrived 6 weeks premature. Doctors placed them into the neonatal ward for additional care and attention. Unfortunately, Jody and Matt were about to receive even more unfortunate news. At first, the neonatal intensive care proved effective. Over the first few days, the twins recovered strength and looked to be growing into healthy babies. As days turned to weeks, however, doctors became concerned. They performed a few tests and then, suspicions confirmed, gave Matt and Jody the bad news. When the doctors approached the nervous parents, Jody knew something was wrong. In her blog, she wrote that doctors took her and her husband to a bare, clinical side room with 3 chairs. She took a seat beside her husband in the sterile office, unable to hold back tears. The doctor cleared his throat and laid the news out flatly. I'm sorry, he said, according to Jody's blog post. Both Abigail and Isabel have Down syndrome. Dread knocked Jody in the gut, and a sensation like something had just ripped out my heart made her chest feel hollow. Already with one young child to raise, Matt and Jody feared what it would be like to be the parents of twins with Down syndrome. How had this happened? The odds of both twin babies having the extra chromosome were 1,000,000 to 1. However, shortly after receiving the news, something incredible happened. When she found the strength, Jody checked on her newborn twins, her thoughts racing. How would she feel? How would she react? She watched her babies for a moment, digesting, processing, and then was blindsided by her emotions. Amazingly, her love for her new children only intensified. Still, even with hearts full of love, the couple struggled with their new reality. Matt told Barcroft TV, "It was as if the whole world had ended. Life was not how I wanted it. I just shut down completely. What was supposed to be a happy addition of 2 baby girls to the young family had turned into visions of unimaginable complications." Questions mounted for Matt and Jody. Would the girls walk? Would they talk? Jody wrote. With little information on what Down syndrome was or how it would affect the entirety of their lives, the couple left the hospital, dread still weighing them down. How would they cope? When Matt and Jody arrived at home with their twins, they started Googling Down syndrome and what it would take to raise their daughters. Only after they digested every bit of information available could they start planning their children's future. Unfortunately, another dose of doctor-delivered bad news was right around the corner. As it turned out, baby Abigail was deaf, and Isabel had a hole in her heart. Compounding matters, both twins had underactive thyroids, meaning they'd be unable to produce certain hormones. They'd spend a lifetime plagued with potential depression, tiredness, and weight gain. Despite mounting medical complications for their twins and visions of endless challenges, the Perrys have embraced life with Abigail and Isabel. Sure, it's been hard work, though that's always the case with young twins. But both Matt and Jody admit their lives have been changed for the better. The twins' conditions have actually brought the family closer together, according to Matt. Finley, their son, pitches in helping his sisters and has come to understand the everyday complications of Down syndrome. It sounds sort of sugar-coated, Jody said in an interview, but the only things that they've brought into our life are positive. There's nothing in the world that could convince me to change them. So touched by Isabel and Abigail's impacts on her life, Jody organized a campaign focused on helping people to better understand Down syndrome. The Twinsis campaign highlights the positives of raising children with Down syndrome, emphasizing how what might seem like a curse is actually a blessing. Now 6 years old, the twins have integrated into the mainstream education system. Between themselves, the two communicate almost strictly in sign language, but their spoken language skills are steadily improving. The woman who was abducted age 12, held captive for 19 years, and gave birth to 9 children. It's 2016, and Rosalind McGinnis has just arrived in the Mexican border city of Nogales. With 8 children in tow, she waits nervously for the papers that will allow her to return to the United States, almost 2 decades after she disappeared from an Oklahoma school. Here is the story of her horrific ordeal. Rosalind's nightmare apparently began when she was a mere 10 years old and living in Springfield, Missouri. There, she'd enjoyed a relatively normal childhood, playing in the local park with her brothers and learning to play the violin. And as a student on the honor roll, the young girl had a future that looked bright. Even at such a tender age, Rosalind had big plans. In a November 2018 interview with KSHB, Kansas City's 41 Action News, she recalled her youthful aims, saying, "I wanted to grow up to be a veterinarian and teach violin. I had goals as a very young child." Sadly, however, her life was to play out in a different way. When Rosalind was 10, her mother, Gayla, met one Henry Piet while distributing leaflets in their neighborhood. What's more, soon the pair's friendship became a romance. And yet Henry apparently had a dark side. According to Rosalind, he started to sexually abuse her, a trauma that she says remained etched in her memory to this day. "It's like life stops the moment you're sexually abused," Rosalind told 41 Action News. "You can remember every detail, everything. Like where you were. The sun was shining." She said, "It's kind of hard to explain to someone who hasn't been through that, but it's like imprinted on your mind." Furthermore, Rosalind believes her mom, Gayla, was aware that Henry was abusing her, and claims that she did nothing to prevent it. And it seems that things got worse when Henry later relocated the family to Wagner, Oklahoma. There, you see, the McGinnises found themselves cut off from their loved ones back in Missouri. Henry soon married Gayla too, but Rosalind says she never saw him as a father figure. "He knew exactly who to target and how to get what he wanted," she continued. "He was never a stepfather. He was a child predator who moved into my neighborhood and targeted my family." In Oklahoma, Rosalind claims the abuse continued. Then, when she was 11 years old, events reportedly took a bizarre turn. Allegedly, Henry attempted to marry his young stepdaughter, asking his son to officiate a ceremony in a van. It's also said that he subjected Gayla to at least one violent beating. By all accounts, Gayla then decided to leave her abusive husband, taking her child back to stay with a grandparent in Missouri. However, Henry apparently caught up with them there and forced them to return to Oklahoma, where they moved into a tent outside the small town of Gore. And yet, soon enough, says Rosalind, Gayla tried to escape once more. This time it seems that Gayla fled with her children to a woman's refuge, but that this still wasn't enough to keep Rosalind safe. And on January 31st, 1997, she was attending Pansy Kid Middle School in the city of Poteau, Oklahoma, when a man arrived to collect her, whisking her away from her family to begin an allegedly terrifying ordeal. With her daughter now missing, Gayla reached out to Child Search Ministries, and soon the organization had produced flyers bearing Rosalind's details, along with the heartfelt plea, "Please help find this child." The accompanying text also suggests that Henry might have played a role in the young girl's disappearance. However, Rosalind appeared to have vanished without a trace, and just prior to her 13th birthday, the searches would ultimately cease. For 19 long years, in fact, her whereabouts remained a mystery. But then in 2016, she re-emerged, saying that she'd been held against her will by Henry in Mexico during the intervening time. A shocking story then began to emerge. According to Rosalind, it was her stepfather, Henry, who had kidnapped her from school all those years ago. "I didn't know what was happening," she reported to 41 Action News. "The next thing I know, my mother's not there, my brothers are not there, and none of my family are there, and I'm by myself with this man." Rosalind said that Henry had taken her to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he rented a hotel room. And there it's claimed he managed to convince the terrified girl that she'd been complicit in his abuse, and that she faced being sent to a mental institution if they were found. "That was the last thing that made me feel helpless," she recalled. It's reported that in order to disguise Rosalind's identity, Henry forced her to wear glasses and dye her hair black. He also apparently told her that she would have to relinquish her name and instead give her the first of various aliases. And allegedly, after months of being sexually and physically abused by her stepfather, Rosalind fell pregnant, although she ultimately lost the baby. "I was scared and I was so confused and I didn't even know what was happening," Rosalind said. "Looking back on what happened to me, I don't even know how any human can do that to a child, what he did to me." However, by all accounts, the abuse continued, with Henry shuttling his stepdaughter between different hotels during those initial months. It's claimed that Henry was then eventually able to smuggle Rosalind south into Mexico, and it was apparently there a few years later, when she was just 15 years old, that Rosalind gave birth to their first child. Despite the arrival of a young son, though, it seems that they were living in abject poverty, sleeping in a rotting mobile home without access to proper utilities. What's more, Rosalind's brood continued to grow, despite her desperate circumstances. And reportedly, while Henry spent what little money they had on drugs and alcohol, his stepdaughter resorted to begging in order to keep the children fed. Rosalind said that at one stage she'd raise funds by selling homemade ice cream, but that Henry kept her under close observation even then. Rosalind also claims that on a number of occasions she attempted to escape her captor, yet it seems that he always managed to catch up with her, doling out harsh punishment to boot. "When I was caught, the consequences were great," Rosalind continued in her interview with 41 Action News. "Eventually, at one point in time, it didn't affect me anymore because I was used to it." Then, as the years passed, the violence reportedly continued. In fact, according to Rosalind, Henry regularly beat her with weapons and other objects, even going so far as to shoot her a few times. And on one occasion, she claims he assaulted her with a frying pan, injuring her so badly that her arm was sliced to the bone. It's alleged that ultimately Rosalind gave birth to all of her total of 9 children while in captivity, struggling to raise them as she dealt with an onslaught of abuse. Then, towards the beginning of 2016, she met Ian and Lisa, a British-American couple who would finally provide a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. At the time, Rosalind and the children were by all accounts living with Henry in the central Mexican city of Oaxaca. And when they first encountered Ian and Lisa, they were shopping in a local supermarket. "We were in line and they were in front of us," Lisa recalled to Action 41 News. "They had 2 giant carts of groceries. One was entirely filled with meat, which the children told us later was only for him, and they couldn't pay the bill. Lisa continued. They were short on money, so Ian and I gave them money, and she was grateful. Following this, a friendship soon formed between Rosalind and the couple. They were just desperate to talk, Lisa explained to 41 Action News. Not the very youngest ones, because they wouldn't say anything until they got to know us, but they just wanted anybody to talk to because it was not something they were allowed to do. Yet the relationship was cut short when Henry moved the family to a remote mountain village in the Oaxaca region. Fortunately, however, Ian and Lisa remained in contact with Rosalind, or Stephanie as she was known by then. And it was during a visit to the mother's home that the British-American couple realized that something was terribly wrong. Lisa said they arrived to find the children dangling precariously off the balcony, a sign of their desperation perhaps for contact with the outside world. Inside the home, meanwhile, things went from bad to worse. There were 3 stalls, for lack of a better word, there all in a line with a raw cement floor, Lisa recalled, and they had holes in the walls for doors and windows, but no doors and windows. And on the floor of each of the cubicles were very, very thin foam exercise mats, and these were the kids' beds. You had 8 children living in 3 cubicles that were little more than walk-in closet size, Lisa continued. Then, on another visit, the couple apparently discovered one of Rosalind's daughters lying in a fetal-like posture on the floor, and all the youngsters were painfully thin. You could just feel the desperation, she said, both in the children and in her. Concerned for Rosalind and her children, Lisa and Ian continued to visit them at their remote village home. And on one occasion, it seems that Henry revealed to them that he was 62, 3 decades older than the alleged mother of his children. The couple then grew increasingly alarmed. He went home and I said, "Ian, she's 32 years old," Lisa recalled to 41 Action News. Her oldest kid would be turning, I think at that point he was going to be turning 17. And I said, "That's wrong. You take 17 away from 32, that's 15, she added. He's 62. She would have been 14 when she got pregnant. This is wrong. There's something seriously wrong." At that time, Rosalind fell ill and required surgery to take out her gallbladder. And the mother later claimed that while she was recovering in a tent following a crude operation, Henry grew violent and ordered her to do household chores. According to Rosalind, that was the moment that everything changed. "I knew that if I didn't get out of there, I'd either go insane or I'd end up dying and leaving my kids with that man," she told People in 2017. So when Lisa reached out to offer her support, Rosalind gathered the confidence that she needed to finally break free. Rosalind says that just weeks after speaking to Lisa, she waited until Henry was in an alcohol-induced sleep one day and seized her opportunity to escape. By that point, her eldest son had fled to America, but she grabbed her other 8 children and jumped in a taxi. Eventually, the family arrived at Lisa and Ian's home. While Lisa and Ian subsequently looked after the young family, Rosalind began the process of arranging their return to the United States. And one day, the mother confessed her real name. Lisa then quickly found Rosalind's details online and realized that she's the same person who had gone missing 19 years earlier. The family subsequently made their way to Oaxaca to speak to the U.S. consulate in the city. However, officials there weren't able to help. So desperate, Rosalind reached out to Lisa, who contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on her behalf. Using the organization's advice, Rosalind then took the children by bus to Nogales, a city some 1,600 miles north of Oaxaca. And there they at last received the documents they needed to make it home. Leaving their ordeal behind, they finally arrived in the United States later in 2016, with their wider family greeting them in Kansas City, Missouri. "Me and my kids rode an airplane together for the first time," Rosalind told 41 Action News. "I was scared. They were scared. But they were so excited too." Yet even though she and her children were at last safely across the border, Rosalind remained frightened that her alleged abuser would find her. "She would tell me about the nightmares," Lisa recalled. "Every single night. I swear to God he was standing over me." Eventually, Rosalind decided to open up about her experience in the hope that Henry might be brought to justice. And her wish seemingly began to come true in October 2017, when the authorities arrested him as he was trying to cross into the United States. In November 2017, Henry appeared in court facing charges of kidnapping and traveling with the intent to engage in a sexual act with a juvenile. So far, he's denied the charges, claiming that Rosalind is his wife and that the vast majority of her allegations are lies. As of December 2018, he's in Wagner County Jail, Oklahoma, awaiting trial. Meanwhile, things have been tough for Rosalind and her children. Apart from everything else, although the family are now safe from the alleged abuse, they've had to contend with financial difficulties. In fact, the cost of health care, rent, and tutoring for the kids have left the family struggling to make ends meet. Yet despite all this, Rosalind has bright hopes for the future and plans to renovate a house to provide her children with a stable home. Meanwhile, a GoFundMe account established by her cousin, Dana Archuleta, has so far raised almost $40,000 to help them on their journey. And for now, it seems that McGinnis is simply happy to have escaped with her life. As she said to 41 Action News, "It's a miracle I'm sitting here today." This baby was found in a bag tied to a tree, and she had a head wound crawling with maggots. Upon hearing the faint sounds of crying, the Vietnamese farmer decides that he must go and investigate the unnerving noise. His search leads him into a coffee plantation where he sees a plastic bag dangling from a tree. And when he peers inside, he finds a newborn baby being eaten alive by maggots. The Lam Dong province is situated in Vietnam's Central Highlands. The area boasts a mix of mountains and forests, which gives the location a unique appearance. And it's this spectacular scenery, which includes a heady mix of lakes, hills, and waterfalls, that attracts visitors to the area, who come to seek out the region's many beauty spots. For those who call the Lam Dong province home, work tends to revolve around farming. The area's economy relies heavily on growing coffee, tea, and vegetables. As of 2011, Lam Dong's GDP was the equivalent of slightly less than $1 billion, and general levels of poverty still pose problems in the region. It's not known if economic factors played a part in a tragic story which unfolded in Lam Dong province in 2019, for it was then that a little baby was found abandoned in the most harrowing of circumstances. And while poverty might not have been a factor in this child's situation, it's certainly true to say that impoverishment contributes to child abandonment statistics within Vietnam. The newborn in question has been deserted by its parents in a coffee plantation in March. The tiny infant had been left dangling from a tree in a plastic bag and would have quickly perished had a passing farmer not heard her crying. She was suffering from sunburn and had sustained a number of insect bites. What's more, her little head was significantly swollen and was also sporting a nasty wound. There was no telling exactly how long the baby had been there. However, estimates suggested that she was no more than 5 days old. It seemed that she'd been abandoned with no regard for her survival. And by the time the farmer found the child, maggots were already festering in her little eyes and nose, as well as the gaping hole in her head. The farmer rushed the infant to the local hospital in Dalat, the capital of Lam Dong province. Once there, the doctors cleaned the baby up and rid her of the maggots that were feeding off her tiny body. However, there was further bad news for the baby, as she was diagnosed as suffering from an inherited condition known as hydranencephaly. Hydranencephaly is very rare, occurring in fewer than 1 in 10,000 births around the world. The condition affects the central nervous system. Furthermore, symptoms can include fluid on the brain, a swollen head, blindness, paralysis, and seizures. Heartbreakingly, the odds of survival for those born with hydranencephaly aren't high. Many die before reaching their first birthday. Indeed, doctors predicted the abandoned baby had less than a year to live. And what's more, due to the small size of the hospital in Dalat, there was little that its doctors could do to treat the child's condition. With no known family, there was no one to care for the infant. In desperation, the hospital turned to Venerable Min Tai, the head nun at the nearby Hu Quang Monastery, for help. Tai was known in Dalat for her charitable endeavors. She had already provided care for 10 orphans who ranged in age from babies to teenagers. And as soon as she heard about the abandoned infant, she rushed to the hospital to see the child. However, nothing could prepare the nun for what she'd find there. In April 2019, Tai told TV station Channel News Asia, "When I first saw her, my heart ached when I imagined the pain and suffering she endured, and tears started flowing from my eyes. I could not believe that a parent would do this to their own child," the nun added. "All I could think of was finding a way to save her life, no matter the cost." With that in mind, Tai decided to adopt the orphan baby, who was given the name Hoai An. In the Vietnamese language, the moniker means forever peace. Of course, Tai herself had no time to rest. It was her aim to secure treatment for the new infant in her care, and soon she pointed in the direction of the Mount Elizabeth Hospital in Singapore. Mount Elizabeth was the nearest facility that could treat Hoai An properly, because it had the doctors and equipment needed. As such, it was the baby's only hope. However, Singapore was around 800 miles from Dalat, so Tai started appealing to all kind hearts across Vietnam to try to secure the funds for Hoai An's transfer. Later, Tai revealed she initially had little hope of being able to fundraise enough money to help Hoai An. She told Channel News Asia, "At first I felt very lonely and lost because I did not think anyone would find out about her story. However, as word began to spread on social media, people started calling and donations began pouring in. Indeed, within a matter of days, Tai had managed to raise around $25,000 toward Hoai An's travel and treatment in Singapore. Lots of support came through social media, but there was at least one person who learned of the infant's plight when visiting Hu Quang Monastery. That individual was Phung Lu, who had come to Vietnam from his home in Florida. Describing his reaction to meeting little Hoai An in April 2019, Lu told Channel News Asia, "I was very hurt inside when I first saw her because I've never heard of a situation like hers before." He added, "As the situation was right there in front of me, I felt obligated to do my best to help her. I may not be as much help as the nuns, but I'll do whatever I can to help Hoai An survive. It's worth it." And Lu wasn't the only person to be touched by Hoai An's story. Support for the infant snowballed, and the Vietnamese Immigration Department fast-tracked the baby's passport application. As a result, a process that usually takes 2 weeks was completed in 48 hours. Hoai An was soon on her way to Singapore with Lu, Tai, and fellow nun Thien Ngo. Hoai An and her entourage arrived in Singapore in April 2019, and the baby was placed in a room in the Mount Elizabeth Hospital Children's Ward alongside Tai and Ngo. Lu, meanwhile, arranged his own accommodation. Once Hoai An was settled in, doctors got to work on treating the infant and easing her suffering. When Hoai An arrived at Mount Elizabeth Hospital, she was suffering from a fever. What's more, her head wound had turned necrotic, meaning her tissue had begun to die. She was therefore susceptible to infection. However, there was some hope regarding the swelling to her head, as it may have been down to a more common condition called hydrocephalus, rather than the more serious hydroencephaly. Dr. Tang Kok Ki, a brain specialist, was among those charged with caring for Hoai An. He cleaned up her wounds and drained the surplus fluid from her head. This helped to relieve pressure in the baby's skull. However, alongside her physical ailments, Hoai An also seemed to be suffering from the trauma of her abandonment. According to Tai, Hoai An needed to be constantly close to her carer and would cry throughout the night. The nun attributed this behavior to the harrowing ordeal she'd faced in the first few days of her life. Min told Channel News Asia, "The most difficult part of taking care of her was the first few days when I could not sleep or rest because she cries a lot during the night. But with the help of Tai and the staff of Mount Elizabeth Hospital, Hoai An would receive the care she needed. To cure the lesion on her head, the child needed daily medication. However, she appeared to be responding well to her treatment. As a result, doctors halved her estimated recovery period from 2 months to 1. All the while, Tai kept Hoai An's many supporters updated with her condition via Facebook. And from her posts, it seemed that things were looking up for the infant. With that in mind, Tai and Lu remained hopeful that Hoai An would thrive, despite her grim prognosis. Lu told Channel News Asia, "If the doctor says the baby or the person will die tomorrow or 1 week later, we still do our best to help them live." Lu added that he was hoping for a miracle when it came to Hoai An's health. He explained to Channel News Asia in April 2019, "In many cases where science says there's no hope or cure, we still take care of them. In a few cases, they survive and become healthy again." And it appeared that Tai shared his positivity, promising to care for Hoai An for as long as possible. Speaking of the poorly infant, Tai told Channel News Asia, "We nicknamed her Ho Sa Den, succulent plant. Even if nearly the entire plant is gone, if one leaf is left, it can still regrow and become full again. Even if Hoai An has been through a great deal of pain and suffering, as long as she has a sliver of will to live left in her, there's hope." Staying positive, there was cause for celebration in April 2019 when Hoai An had spent a full month in the care of Mount Elizabeth Hospital. To mark the occasion, staff at the hospital threw a party for the infant, complete with food and a cake. And a series of images from the celebration was shared on the Mount Elizabeth Hospital Facebook page. While speaking to Channel News Asia, Lou explained how the full-month party held spiritual and cultural significance in Asia. The celebration is usually held when an infant reaches their first-month birthday, and then that people gather and pray for the baby and its parents, wishing them blessings and good health. During the ceremony, Tai fulfilled the role of Hwai-an's mother, but it had been the hospital staff who came up with the idea of the celebration. Dr. Noel Yeo, the CEO of Mount Elizabeth Hospital, told Channel News Asia, "The special circumstances surrounding this little patient moved our nurses and staff so much. It seems that baby Hwai-an made a big impression on some of the staff who cared for her during her time at Mount Elizabeth Hospital." Speaking of the infant, Nurse Adeline Jane said, "She's grown chubbier and her voice has grown louder. She's a beautiful girl and very lucky. When she came in, she was dehydrated." The fact that Hwai-an had survived her first month in the hospital was considered a miracle by some. And following her party, it was time for doctors to prepare the child for potentially life-saving surgery. During the procedure, surgeons would insert a device in her head to drain fluid off her brain. To pay for Hwai-an's continuing treatment, a nonprofit organization known as Give Asia Kindness, which provides medical assistance to underprivileged families, established a crowdfunding campaign. Its target was to cover Hwai-an's surgery and medication costs for 3 years. Soon enough, cash had been raised for Hwai-an to undergo surgery. She did so in June 2019, and the organization shared an update on their crowdfunding page shortly after the procedure. It read, "Dear donors, we visited baby Hwai-an this morning after her surgery for inserting the VP shunt fluid drain recently." The update from Give Asia Kindness continued, "She looks great, and we heard from Venerable Min Tai that she's slowly recovering. Let's all keep baby Hwai-an in our prayers and kindly share this campaign with your friends, as we're still far away from the goal of paying baby Hwai-an's hospital bill and her medication for the next 3 years." Later in June 2019, it was announced that Hwai-an would soon be discharged from the hospital and return home. And this news was soon confirmed in a Facebook post from Mount Elizabeth Hospital. It read, "Baby Hwai-an is going home. After months of care and recovery, baby Tri Hwai-an principal surgeon, Dr. Tengkok Ki, says her wounds have healed and she's now doing fine enough to discharge. Consequently, Tai soon returned home to the Hu Quang Monastery in Vietnam with baby Hwai-an. However, this was unfortunately not the happy ending for which those caring for the infant had hoped. Sadly, in July 2019, Hwai-an's condition took a turn for the worse. And on this occasion, the little baby was unable to recover. News of Hwai-an's death was confirmed on Facebook. In a heartbreaking post, Tai revealed how the infant had passed away in her sleep at 4 a.m. on the morning of July 12, 2019. The nun had given the baby some milk at around 3 a.m. when she was woken by the child's cries. But even after she fed the baby an entire bottle, Tai couldn't soothe Hwai-an. Hwai-an eventually drifted back to sleep. However, when Tai checked on her later, she discovered the infant wasn't breathing. Hwai-an was subsequently transferred to a local hospital, but doctors there were unable to resuscitate her. She was declared dead after just 3 months and 3 weeks on Earth. Give Asia Kindness shared the news of Hwai-an's death on its crowdfunding page it established to help the infant. The update read, "She seemed to be healthy up until yesterday, eating and playing as normal. She passed away in peace after having her last meal. We would like to thank all of you kind donors that contribute to baby Hwai-an's medical treatment." Following Hwai-an's death, Tai returned to her nature metaphor to describe what had happened. She said, "The winds of impermanence have shaken the last succulent leaf off the branches of life, with no time for a new plantlet to sprout." Addressing the infant, she added, "May you soon be reborn into a better world." Mount Elizabeth Hospital also issued a statement in response to Hwai-an's death, which stated it had been saddened by the news of the infant's passing. The statement said, "She was a spirited baby who fought bravely despite her condition. We would like to extend our condolences to Venerable Min Tai and her caretakers. May Hwai-an rest in peace." At the end, we want to know your opinion about the story in the comments box below.